The war of words has erupted between Greg Alexander and Cameron Smith over the origin of wrestling tactics that are wreaking havoc across the NRL. Alexander singled out Melbourne as the pioneers of the questionable tackling technique, sparking a furious defence from the former Storm skipper.
Remember when this tackle first came in and I thought this is a disgrace, like players dropping their weight on the back of players' legs. A disgrace. And it was a Melbourne Storm tackle. Shock, horror.
Jesse Bromwich was the first one.
Yeah, I remember the charge, and I remember it just creeping into the game. Remember going, wow, what are these blokes doing? And another Melbourne Storm tackle.
But I just don't know how you can come up with that comment to say that, single out one club to say they introduced that tackle into our sport. That's a little bit over the top. Yeah. Because off the top of my head, I can't ever recall seeing Brandy at one of our training sessions. I can't. To single out the Melbourne Storm, that's really unfair.
I didn't think it was any type of revelation when I made those comments about the hip drop emanating out of the Melbourne Storm, the grapple, the chicken wing, the rolling pins, the crusher, the hip drop. I think they all emanated out of Melbourne.
I just thought that was a little bit unfair that to label one club that they were the team or the club responsible for introducing a tackle like the hip drop.
I'm not a clickbait journalist looking for headlines. To be honest, I just thought it was common knowledge that a lot of people felt that the tackling techniques that have come out we've seen in the game have come out of the Melbourne Storm.
I've seen an end of season presentation awards night information sheet acknowledging all the staff of a certain club, and this is well before Melbourne Storm come into the competition in 1998. And it had, under a description of the title of this person's occupation, it had wrestling coach. Now, I'm talking in the 90s, so the coaching of wrestling was well and truly in the game before Melbourne got in there. I just want people to acknowledge that.
Yeah, strong words there from our very own Greg Alexander that has hit a nerve with Melbourne Storm and ex-Melbourne Storm player and legend Cameron Smith last week. It blew up. Melbourne weren't happy. Brandy was quite strong in his opinion, and so was Cameron. Who was right? Who was wrong? How did we see this?
Well, there's bits of truth in pretty much everything they say. Look, to Cameron Smith's point there about before the 90s with the wrestling coaches, I know for a fact Brisbane did have wrestling coaches well before the Storm in the 90s. But the wrestling back then, this is a bit Cameron left out of that, the wrestling back then was not the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu holes that we're seeing now. Different. It was all basically back then about trying to get the ball run on his back and how to best do that. So it's completely different wrestling. Look, many of these techniques... look, I've got to be careful here because every time I talk about the Storm, I upset them. But the fact is, when you talk to other people around the league, and I said this to Craig Bellamy one day, I said, Craig, what you do not realise when he defended the Storm and the accusations against the Storm is that many of the players and assistant coaches who go on to be head coaches or go to be assistants elsewhere, or players who change clubs or go to become assistants at other clubs, one of the first things they always do when they walk into the new club is say, this is how we did it at Melbourne. And they explain that. So that's how the information spreads. Now,
but the actual hip drop,
yes.
That's what last week was about.
Yes.
Is that we all know, we've spoken for years about their wrestling techniques and how advanced they are, and they are the best in the game. And the evolution of it has a lot to do with Melbourne. But the actual hip drop, which is playing a part in our game that no one likes at the moment, and it was the topic of the week. But Brandy pretty much said that it was the Melbourne Storm where it come from.
Brandy was wrong.
He was
Brandy was wrong.
Why is that, Buzz?
Because I went back and looked at every charge in the last 4 years since 2018, and they have had 4 hip drop tackles, players found guilty. The Brisbane Broncos have had 8.
That
doesn't mean they didn't start it.
That doesn't, yeah, exactly.
No, well, just let me finish, Mick.
You got the floor, Buzz, take it away.
No, well, what I'm saying, they gave it to me in date order, and it took about 8 or 9 charges before a Storm
So Melbourne gave it to you, Buzz?
No, the NRL gave it to me, Mick. The NRL gave it to me. Glenn Jackson gave it to me because I asked him for it.
But Buzz,
So you
generally
cannot
there is-
say the
Buzz-
tackle originated at Melbourne Storm.
No, and you can't say it didn't.
And I can't say it originated at the Broncos either.
That's true.
What I can say is the tackle's a problem in the game because there's been 42 of them found guilty, and 21 of those cases there was no suspension at all.
Yeah, and how
That's-
many injuries? How many weeks on the sideline caused by injury from those? We won't know, because you see in Jackson Hastings' instance, he's out for...
Well, Hastings is out for the year, Kent.
Exactly, but so there's 22
Daniel
games, he's on
Saifidi
24
broke
games,
his
he's
leg.
missed.
Will Kennedy might not play until the finals, and there was no charge on that offence.
It wasn't even a charge.
Yeah.
Mate, I'm with you. I'm with you. There is generally a lag whenever a new tackle is introduced into the game.
We all say Melbourne Storm.
No, but
Or Brandy
okay.
does.
Well, no, I've been guilty of saying that as well. But whenever a new tackle is introduced into the game, there is generally a lag between the tackle occurring, being identified by other clubs, then being identified by the NRL, then being charged. It can take weeks, if not months, for it to be identified. And that's where the game is behind. The administration, the match review is behind the game in this instance.
But Kenny, it
to the
should have been 42 of them. It should have been.
Should have been eradicated by now.
Buzz. Brandy's not the first, and he won't be the last, that thinks that Melbourne Storm introduced a lot of the tackling techniques in the game. I mean, it's, you know, to me it was ludicrous that they even suggested that Brandy had... I work with him, he's a good mate of mine, that he's got something against Melbourne and question his integrity as a person and as a commentator.
I'm not. I just said he was
I'm not saying
wrong.
you, Buzz. I'm not saying you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you.
I
But
can go back, Braith, to 2005. We had the NRL got a lot of the media in halfway through the year, and a coach came in and identified Melbourne doing grapple tackles, which was the first wrestling hold that was really applied, where they control the head, the body follows, okay? And that story broke later in the year when Melbourne played Canberra in the first semi-final, and Matthew Elliott was the Canberra coach. Bellamy was the Storm coach, and the irony of it was that Roy Masters was the person at Rota, who's now firmly entrenched in the Storm camp. He was the journalist at Rota. And so since that time, and Melbourne denied it happening back then, Melbourne denied that they were doing anything untoward. So from day one, from the first tackle, they've denied that they've done anything wrong. And since then, we've had chicken wings, we've had rolling pins, we've had crushes, we've had... what else is there? Like, there's all sorts of different moves being applied, and they are not in the spirit of the game. They should not be tolerated in the game. And to Buzz's point, the only way to get it out of the game is to start suspending it out.
When was the last time you
exactly.
saw a chicken wing, Mick?
Yeah. It's
When
gone.
was the last time?
And I'm with you, Buzz.
Because they came
They got
down
rid of it.
heavy on
And
There
to
should be
have-
a separate, specific charge now, which is sad as we have to go for this
Let's
tackle.
get the response here from Melbourne Storm after Brandy Alexander's comments. Melbourne Chairman Matt Tripp, for the Deputy Chair of one of our biggest competitors to make unfounded and stupid comments just goes to the arrogance of that club and the perceived status in the game. Gee, he didn't miss. Continues, it's borderline defamatory to abuse his position as a journalist, as well as being Deputy Chair of a football club in our game, is beyond unacceptable. I can't believe that his continued witch hunt for us for over 20 years still goes on to this day.
That's spicy.
That's brutal. That's a brutal response from Matt Tripp and the Melbourne Storm. What do we think of his response to Greg Alexander?
It was a brutal allegation, and it was a brutal response. You know
Was
what?
he right?
But you know what? I like it.
Yeah.
It's coming up to the...
Of course,
I do.
it's beautiful, yeah.
Kenny,
Really?
We're coming up to... They're playing each other this weekend.
it sets it
The
up.
comp needs spice. It's like you talking Origin
I got
and
no
a
problem with
soft
that.
build-up to Origin. This livens the comp up. Feuds, the game thrives on them.
There's no doubt the Storm have a chip on their shoulder as soon as anyone mentions the word wrestle. Regardless, and it comes back to your point, Braith, where they're getting blamed for their previous
But
sins.
they also have the
Do you know what I
formula.
think about Melbourne? I think they only hear the negative.
Yeah.
They
Of
don't
course
listen.
they do.
Like,
Of
we
course.
sit here every
Yeah.
week and we commentate their games and we praise them every week about the powerhouse they've been since they've come to the competition, the success they've had, their continued success year after year after year under Craig Bellamy and their organisation and the head honchos has been unbelievable, unrivaled. But then if anyone critiques or criticises Melbourne in any way, shape or form, it's Sydney against Melbourne and we're attacking Melbourne Storm.
Because you don't know what else we can't factor in, is if you did take the wrestle out of their game, would they still be as effective? And no one knows the answer to that because
they're
they've been
so
doing it.
sensitive.
They've been extraordinarily successful